What's up? Welcome to the Research Her, the podcast teaching us wellness through research-based science. I am Alicia, and guess what, y'all? Your girl did not do her homework before she left out the country, okay? Don't judge me. I don't want to hear no judgment. We are recording from Singapore. Why? Because I planned out this whole elaborate podcast, and guess what? I didn't record it before I left. And then I was like, actually, I want to change the topic, and it just didn't happen the way I expected to, which goes right into today's topic. But I'll get into that later. I don't want to remind you about how bomb you are, because you should know that already. Instead, what I want to remind you is that you are capable of doing whatever it is you want to do. So if you want, I don't even want to get into specifics. You only fail at the things that you quit, okay? You don't fail at the things you actually try at and keep trying at. You fail at the things you quit. So that goes back to today's topic, which is becoming consistent and forming habits that are long lasting, not just these short-term goals. We want to get to a place as a whole, because I'm working on it too. Because if I was doing what I was supposed to do and if I was consistent, I would have recorded this back in Beijing. But guess what? I went on vacation and decided that I wasn't going to do what I needed to do. So guess what? We're going to fix that. I started looking into papers and trying to find out what is it that I need to do to be a more consistent person and sticking with what my goals are. I want to be better with staying on track in every aspect of life, whether that be fitness or all my goals. And I want to share with you all some of the findings I found to help with whatever goals it is that we want to maintain. So I found a paper that looked at 117 theories, and that's what they identified. And of the 117 theories, I guess papers or theories, 100 met this specific criteria. They all had 5 overarching and interconnecting themes. And what these ideas or these themes are meant to do is help with development and maintenance of change and behavioral change maintenance. We're discussing behavioral changes because the reason that we are healthy or not healthy is because of what? Our behavior. What we do on a daily basis determines what our overarching wellness. So if we want to get on the road to wellness, we have to have better behavior. However, these things can help with more than just that. This will help for anyone who wants to lose weight, remove bad habits. The paper mentioned, if you want to stop doing risky sexual behavior, you want to be more consistent with promoting your brand, you want to call your mama more, live healthier, communicate better, all of these things. By establishing and maintaining behavioral changes, we can get better with these. So here are the 5 criteria that are required to establish and maintain behavioral changes. So first, you want to determine what your motives are, okay? So for me, I am very motivated by my future self. This might sound crazy, but I literally look at who I want to be and who I feel who I can envision myself being. And that is what motivates me. I want my kids to have a happy mommy. I want my husband to have a happy wife. These are all things that motivate me. I want to be able to keep up. I don't want to be slow. I don't want to be behind. I want to be able to have energy and be happy. I think that a lot of our happiness is about how we are able to, how we are affected by our everyday actions. So if I treat myself right, I think I would treat others right as well. And I want to see myself as someone who's able to treat people right. So another motive is you want to be able to enjoy the behavior. If you look at the outcome of the behavior and you aren't happy with it, you can't reinforce that behavior. But if you look at it and you're like, oh shit, that was decent, right? You're able to reinforce that behavior. For instance, a lot of people mention when they eat healthier, they feel better. And if you're constantly looking at the fact that you ate better and you remember how good it felt, that you just felt more energized and you felt healthier, that will help you with maintaining your overall goal. And another thing that was found, as far as finding your motive, is that intrinsic motivation has a stronger influence than external influence. So for someone who, you're doing it for the gram, you are way less likely to maintain that behavioral change versus if you were to say, okay, yes, I want to do it for the gram, but what is more important to me is that I'm doing it for myself. So for instance, if you're someone who is very much into meditation because it fills your soul, that is more important. The fact that it fills your soul is more important than the fact that you want to motivate others. Motivate yourself first, and then everything else can follow. But intrinsic motivation is the most important. And everything that you do has to match your identity. Well, not has to. If you based on the evidence of these theories about maintaining behavioral changes, you want to be sure that whatever the behavior is, it matches your identity. So, for instance, now this is a little personal that I rarely share, but all my homies from back when know. I used to smoke these cigars called Blacks. Now, back then, I don't know. It was before I could legally drink, but you could still buy. You could still buy cigars before you can drink or whatever. But I used to smoke cigars, but I think when it was outside of my dad having a conniption, almost losing his mind when he found out, that was, I know that's an external thing, but really, I'm going to keep it real that I started thinking about, does this actually identify with me, who I am? I've always been into sports, body health, my respiratory, and I don't know, just overall health, right? So the fact that I was smoking didn't even go with my overall identity. So it was very easy for me to stop, look back on it and say, this isn't even me. So I stopped quickly because it wasn't a part of who I was. But if you're someone who, you are about that particular lifestyle, then it more so identifies with who you are, and it's going to continue on with, I guess this is not a good example, so I'm going down the wrong path. What I should say is always, anything that you are doing, make sure it actually identifies with who you are. So if you're someone who loves to eat, you want to be sure, you say, okay, yes, I love to eat, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to love to eat this particular food. I'm going to go to these particular type of restaurants or something like that. Just making sure that you are doing things that match with your identity. So also, theme number 2 is self-regulation. So being able to have pretty much self-control. So coping with behavior barriers, overcoming temptation, managing lapses, and avoiding relapses. So developing coping mechanisms such that when you are in a position where you want to do a particular action, you already have a backup plan. So for instance, if you're someone who knows that, for instance, on Friday nights when you're sitting at the couch, you want to have a bottle of wine. So it's not a glass, a bottle. Look, talking about my poor behaviors from the past. But if you're someone who, when you end up on the couch on Friday nights, you end up drinking a whole bottle of wine, You want to be sure that you come up with what is my alternative. So for me, that alternative was drinking mint tea instead of drink, because that like feeling of the mint tea going down my throat was just as satisfying as the feeling of the wine, right? So if you know that you want to change particular habits, being sure to find a backup plan for when you're in that situation. So being able to cope with a particular action. Okay? So then theme number 3 was having your resources. Now, the way that the paper described resources was a bit different than what I thought a resource was, because they more so focused on like psychological and physical assets that can be drawn on during the process of behavioral regulations. And they specifically talked about like this idea that you are able to, you have like mental resources to go back on. So for instance, they mentioned the fact that you can deplete your resources when you're in a place of stress, tiredness, exhaustion, or intoxication. And that was interesting for me, because in my head I'm thinking resources like, you have a buddy you can call, like, hey, what should I do? Which is a resource, but the paper goes beyond that and talks about more psychological resources. So thought that you remind yourself of like, hey, what I don't want to do is end up in this position, and you pull that resource psychologically out so that you don't find yourself ending up like repeating a particular behavior. Okay? So then number 4 is habit. So a habit is a controlled behavior that becomes automatic over time. And think about this. When I wake up in the morning, I know the first thing I want to do is brush my teeth. Why? Because that shit tastes tart on my tongue, and I don't want no parts of that, right? So automatically when I wake up, I brush my teeth. But some people, their habits can be like back to the every time I sit down on a Friday night to watch movies, I grab a bottle of wine, right? That is a habit. So what you want to start doing is removing cues that trigger that unhealthy behavior. So, for instance, I know that it really is an effect of me not having anything to drink at that moment. I'm just sitting there thirsty. So what do? I drink some mint tea, and that stops from that unhealthy behavior happening. Why? Because I'm not sitting there thirsty, so I don't end up grabbing wine because I already have my glass of tea. So being able to remove out those negative or unhealthy cue, or those cues that causes unhealthy behavior, and replacing them with a more healthy behavior. Number 5. So theme number 5, and this is the end, is environmental and social influences. So this is pretty self-explanatory, but environment. You want to avoid any environment that causes you to not do whatever you set out to do. So for instance, I started off this podcast talking about the fact that I want to be more consistent. So if I know that consistency is hindered by going out on Friday nights and being in a place or being at the bar, right? If I know that that is causing my inconsistency, I want to avoid that environment. Instead, I want to go somewhere that promotes my consistency, which may be just going home or being around people who ends up making it so that so social influence, for instance, being around people who do not help me with staying consistent in my behaviors. So that is an example. You want to be around people who help you with having those positive behaviors. And that is essentially what I wanted to talk about today. So yes, if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and rate and review the podcast and share it if you think it could be helpful for someone. I appreciate you listening, and I'll talk to you next week.